Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining the webinar on sharing information between behavioral health and criminal justice systems. My name is Will Engelhardt. I'm a senior policy analyst with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. And let me just give a little background about this webinar. It's being hosted by the Council of State Governments Justice Center with funding support by the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance, as part of the technical assistance that the CSG Justice Center provides to states and counties that receive funding through the Second Chance Act, SCA, and the Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program, JCMHC. A little bit about the audience that's on the line for the webinar. Most of the folks here are primarily FY15 grantees receiving JCMHC grants for a mental health and criminal justice collaborative project or program, and SCA grantees receiving funding for programs targeting people with co-occurring substance use disorders and mental illnesses. For the speakers, we have I'm really excited to introduce some folks with a lot of experience on information sharing. We have folks that are both current and former grantees for JCMHC and SCA, so particularly relevant for the types of audience members listening to the webinar today. From Johnson County, we have Rob McDougall, the Crisis Service Team Leader, and Chris Schneeweiss, the Human Service Coordinator. We also have speaking Imran Chowdhury from Washington, D.C. He's the Chief Information Officer for the D.C. Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. They'll be talking a little bit about the work that they've done in each of their jurisdictions to implement an information sharing collaborative from scratch. And they'll also talk about the successes and challenges they faced along the way. So just a little overview of what this webinar will look like. Myself and my colleague, Risa Hanneberg, who's a Senior Policy Advisor at the CSG Justice Center, will give a brief introduction to provide some background about why a jurisdiction would want to improve its information sharing capabilities and review some general barriers that most jurisdictions will want to consider. The purpose of this session is not to provide a comprehensive overview of information sharing, but really to provide some examples of county agencies and some of your peers that were able to overcome barriers that may have existed in their jurisdiction, and hopefully their experiences will be useful to you, as many of you are in a similar situation to them when they started their projects. We know that there may be some significant interest in an additional webinar giving a broader overview of some of the challenges for information sharing, specifically around HIPAA and 42 CFR. We can host a follow-up session in partnership with some legal experts about this issue and address some of the legal concerns related to information sharing that jurisdictions may be facing, if there really is a lot of interest around that. However, for this session, following an introduction from the CSG Justice Center, we will turn the presentation over to Johnson County, Kansas, and Washington, D.C. to talk about their information sharing strategies. And just a bit of a logistical piece, all of the speakers were all in separate rooms and separate places around the country, so our apologies if we do end up talking over each other a little bit. We will try to alleviate that as much as possible. And then the final section, we'll be receiving some questions through WebEx, which you can enter on the bottom right hand of your screen throughout the entirety of the presentation, starting right now. And at the end of the presentation, in the final section, we'll pose some of your questions to our presenters, as well as any questions that you may have for the Justice Center. And we really do hope that you ask as many questions as you have, and hope that our speakers can speak to a lot of your questions and really have an informal discussion as much as possible around the types of issues that you may be facing, and see if we can be of help to many of the questions that you're talking about and thinking about. All right, so let's get started. What is an information sharing need? So we all know that it can be a really difficult process in the first place before we even get to information sharing for an agency or a jail or wherever to gather the relevant data into a database that you would want to share in the first place. But once that is achieved, which we all know can be very hard to do, that's where all types of questions around information sharing start to pop up. So we have listed here a couple questions that we've seen, the CSG Justice Center have seen through our technical assistance that we provided. And I thought I'd walk through a couple of them. And I imagine many of you have already identified needs for your county for information sharing. That's why you're here in the first place. But this may be helpful to just think about the types of needs that maybe you haven't identified yet. So one example is that we've heard from community behavioral health clinicians is we never know if our clients are in jail. So again, this just general need immediately pings up some issues around information sharing between agencies. The obvious one is between jail at the booking point when someone's booked into jail and depending on the jurisdiction, a community behavioral health division, or it could be individual behavioral health providers that would need to be contacted. But in some way, immediately, there's a need for sharing between the jail and community behavioral health and mental health providers. The next one, we don't know how many people screen positive for mental illness in our county jail from a mental health court coordinator. This is a huge issue that we've identified throughout the country, connected to some of the work that you may have heard of through the Stepping Up initiative to reduce the prevalence of mental illness, and something through our technical assistance. We've been working with counties that are attempting to implement screening and assessment at their jail. And that can be a really, really huge ask for counties to implement and to achieve. But once you do that, that's just the beginning, because the purpose of that information is not only to guide, for example, if you have screening and assessment at jail, not only to guide your programming at your jail, but also to guide decision-making for release purposes and connection to care. So once you get that screening and assessment at your jail, ideally the jail would be coordinating with, if you have a pretrial release officer for release decisions, they would be coordinating with them, with the courts definitely as identified here through a mental health court coordinator, for identifying connection to care and the right treatment in the community, definitely with the community treatment providers, with community supervision, probation, for them to develop their probation supervision plan. You would want to share that information with them as well. So, you know, once you start identifying more data in your jails or in different parts in your community, that's where these information sharing needs really start to blossom and the needs become quite noticeable. And so just one other example at the bottom of your screen here of a pretrial release officer who says, I will be developing a plan for pretrial supervision, and I need to know if the individual should be connected to mental health services. It's just another good example of one decision-making point, trying to develop a supervision plan. Really, that person would rely on a lot of information from different agencies. I would imagine from the jail for some information there, and then if their client had received services in the community for mental health needs, also with the mental health provider. So just one decision point for one officer requires all types of coordination across agencies. So you've done a great job, you've identified your need, now you need to start thinking about the logistics for addressing this need. There are just three basic processes that can be unpacked a whole lot. But for information sharing, one is collecting the data, two, sharing that information, and then three, using that information to guide decision-making and track progress. So we have a couple questions here that folks would want to possibly consider, but these are just an example of a couple. As our speakers will be talking about, there are many, many other questions to consider, but how do you need to know, or sorry, what do you need to know in order to make good decisions? And again, that speaks to that data question. That really comes up right away, what data is being collected. And then when you move to the next question, who has access to this information, immediately you're thinking about sharing that information and who would be useful in getting the information that you're collecting. And then that third piece, when you really start thinking about how to use that information, where you need to unpack a ton of questions and around the policies and procedures to facilitate the appropriate sharing and use of that information. And we have several questions there to consider. But I mean, that really is the crux of the issue of once you know what you want to collect and once you know what information you would like to share, there are many, many, many details to think through of how to actually get to the point where you can use that information for decision making in real time, and then also for tracking progress down the line. So I've identified some of the needs and some of the general strategies, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Risa Hanneberg, to talk a little bit about some of the barriers that you all may be facing.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Risa Hanneberg, and I am with the CSG Justice Center. I do want to share that I have spent most of my career in Johnson County, Kansas, and so I'll be anxious to hear from my former colleagues a little later in today's webinar. But picking up from where Will left off, as far as I know what it's like to be in the planning teams and the folks around the table who are sitting down to discuss how to make information sharing happen. And it's very, very easy to get bogged down with, you know, what appear to be insurmountable barriers. And so, you know, we just kind of have a brief list here. Knowledge, you know, those of us who came from criminal justice and behavioral health, we're not exactly techies, and we know that technology is crucial as far as making this information sharing happen. We're also not lawyers, and we know that there's a lot of laws and policies and so forth that guide what can and can't be done. So as a first step, it's probably a good idea to just kind of, you know, come to grips with what the knowledge needs are and whether or not you need to get some technical assistance like you all are doing here today, or and other resources that we can help in providing you. The next big barrier, I think, is legal, and it's very common for people to get, I think, maybe somewhat overly concerned about HIPAA. It's kind of ironic because in reality, the laws around HIPAA were really created to hopefully make information sharing electronically more accessible and more, you know, more usable. But it seems like for many, it's created barriers that are hard to figure out. As Will said, I'm not going to really get into the details of this. My first words of encouragement are just a couple. One is that it's very doable, and you're going to hear that today from the folks on the webinar. And secondly, many jump to the, and I've already been on some phone calls with folks, it's like, it sounds like we need to hire a lawyer. And, you know, I would just maybe throw out as a first step on that your county probably already has an attorney on contract to help deal with HIPAA-related issues, just because of the regulations that maybe some of your other county departments are already contending with, particularly if you're doing any billing through your mental health or public health agencies. So you really might have a legal resource that you can go to fairly easily. The next barriers many times tend to be around the technology. You don't have a process to capture the data, and then if you're dealing, as most times, with different systems, you don't know how to get those two systems to talk to each other and to be able to track the same individual as they potentially leave the jail, go on to maybe community-based supervision or community-based behavioral health services. So my advice there is that it's very important, if you can, to have that IT person on your planning team so they can hear your conversations and start to maybe troubleshoot in their mind how some sort of system to capture the data. Many jurisdictions are creating what are being referred to as data warehouses, but ways to capture the information that the different agencies download their information into, and then how that can be then obtained by the users. And of course, there will be unidentified obstacles that will come up that you will not foresee, but as they happen, you'll have to work through those as well. I lost my screen. Will, can you switch me back to the screen?
Yes. Hold on one second.
I clicked on the arrow and it didn't move forward. It just made it larger.
And while we have this quick pause, as we just fixed that and looks like we're back, I just wanted to mention for folks, because we've had a couple questions, and Risa, I apologize for interrupting, but this presentation will be made available, the presentation that we're going over right now will be made available to folks through our website, a link to it following this session immediately. And if you are interested in the actual slides themselves, a PDF can be made available of the slides as well. So, sorry, Rita, I think you're back and good to go.
Yeah, I am. Just go ahead and move me forward. Okay. Thank you, everybody. obviously my technical expertise is showing today. So this chart, maybe looks a little daunting for you, but if you spend a little time looking, it's basically a process flow as far as something I would recommend that in your planning team that you sit down and create for your jurisdiction, and that you have all the players around the table that you've identified that you want to share information with, and you start taking the case step by step. And as you identify different points along the way where it would be beneficial to share information, that you mark those, and then you take the time to work out at each of those junctures what is the information that's necessary to share. One of the first questions is it protected health information? I think many times jurisdictions get all hung up on barriers when a lot of times what they're trying to share is not protected. And in fact, much of the justice information is public information. So many times that side of the equation is fairly easy. So I would recommend that you map through your system, you identify these key points where you would want to share information, and then you start talking through your process. I want to also emphasize, that we're trying to say, hey, that this is very, very doable, but by the same token, don't think that this is any green lights to go out there and just start talking and sharing information with each other, because there are still very many protections and process that you need to have in place. And I know that these will be addressed later, but you're probably not going to get away from getting releases of information signed and having some memorandums of understanding formed, and just making sure that you've got a lot of great training in place around confidentiality, so that the whole process remains very professional, and that at all times the reason that you're sharing the information is for your clients to be more successful, and also to continue in the efforts for public safety. Okay. Again, just some relevant sources of law. We're just throwing this up for you for your notes. The obvious legal ones there at the top. I want to maybe jump down to state statutes, because I think many will be surprised that their state statutes sometimes are more limiting than those federal regulations and statutes that you are seeing in the first bullets. So please get copies of your state statutes, and then start looking at the potential barriers that you have at the local level. Sometimes those are the ones that might be hardest to work through. Agency policies and procedures, dealing with potentially interpersonal relationships, agency directors, individuals that are just really not on board, don't understand why this is important. It's incredibly crucial to get those kinds of folks and your leaders on board with this to provide the support that you're going to need. I think that's it for me. I am going to now turn it over, as I said, to two of my former colleagues from Johnson County, Kansas, Rob McDougall and Chris Schneeweiss, and I'm very excited that they're going to be presenting on an information sharing application that was created in Johnson County to, again, an example of how information can successfully be shared and, again, better our outcomes for our clients. So I think Chris is going to start.
Thanks, Risa. Yes, the application that Johnson County has been working on developing, we built this in-house. We've been working on it since 2008. The application is called My Resource Connection, and we went into this with the vision of kind of developing an application after what you would find in a medical clinic, kind of the medical clinic model. If you were going in, let's say, to have your broken leg fixed, but they find out ahead of time, they're going to check you to make sure that, your blood pressure is appropriate, and all these other things are acceptable before they address the leg. That's kind of what we looked at, is we want to have an application that looks at the whole person to address them holistically. So how do we go about doing that? Well, there were two things that came at the same time. One was we had a study done in 1999. A consulting group came in and actually looked at our human service delivery, and were able to identify that we had a lot of areas where we had gaps and we had people falling through the cracks. And then in other cases, we actually were being redundant. We were providing the same service that another agency or organization was providing. And that example is who we like to call Wally. This is actually based after a real individual. He was on probation, but also on parole. He was involved with mental health services. He was going to a day reporting program, also with a treatment provider. And this individual, they actually were able to find out at one time had 28 different case or supervision or treatment plans. And in some cases, those treatment plans were asking him to do the same thing but do them in different ways, or in other cases was pulling him in different directions, and the likelihood that that individual was going to be successful was greatly limited based on the fact that we were not sharing information and being very siloed. So we had to ask ourselves, kind of like what Risa and Will were talking about, you kind of got to ask yourself the tough questions, which is, how do we increase the amount of information that our staff have available to them about not just the client that they're serving, but the household that that client is involved in? You know, we're talking about a mutual client, mutual households. We also need to help link them up with internal and external agencies so that we can be more efficient and effective, because as a county government, we only provide so many services. So in some cases, we actually have to link up with our community-based resources to best serve the individuals we work with. And then the big thing that our staff told us was, look, we also got to work towards self-sufficiency. You know, the only way a client or consumer, if the only way they can get those services is to come through me, they'll never learn to be self-sufficient, and eventually they're going to get off probation, they're going to get out of service with mental health, and they're going to have to be able to know where to get these services on their own. So with that being said, the application that I'm talking about is actually twofold. There is a secured version that our staff uses, which is the data sharing piece, and then there is a public version which just has the resource information mapping capabilities that anyone in the community can use. And again, My Resource Connection is a web-based resource developed with the primary goal of helping these individuals be successful in whatever success looks like for them. So to develop an application like this, a lot of things have to happen. First and foremost, we tried an initial attempt of developing a system, and it failed because we went at it from an IT perspective. And what we ended up doing was coming back, starting over, and we developed it with what we call system specialists. These are individuals from all of our human service departments, and the acronyms you see here are Corrections, Court Services, Human Service Department, our Health and Environment Department, Mental Health, Developmental Supports, our library system, which is actually part of the county, and then we actually have a representative on our team that's from the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, which is actually Kansas City, Kansas. And these are people that have boots on the ground. They are the ones meeting with citizens every day, and they are the ones that drive this program forward. They're the ones that help design enhancements. They provide critique and feedback to us. But I'll also tell you up front, the only way a system like this can be successful is if you have commitment from the department directors who are going to be sharing that data. And again, as you can see here, we have commitments, and all of our department directors are actually part of the My Resource Connection governing team. They are part of an executive board that oversees this application. They respond to the recommendations. They help provide clarity and direction to us. They actually vote on what initiatives we move forward on and what we don't. So that is key. I mean, if you don't have director support, I mean, this will never go any farther. And then as Risa talked about, getting your legal departments involved. And I will tell you, for Johnson County, we got our legal department on board, but we also have HIPAA attorneys that are external from the county. We contract out with these people, and they are legal experts where HIPAA and Federal Code of Regulations is concerned. So they are the ones also, they went through all of our releases of information, our notice of privacy practices. They helped draft the documentation that we used in our business associate agreements. So that's key also. But the one thing where Johnson County, I would say, is very blessed, and I think Risa would agree with this, is we have a group of technology individuals in our Department of Technology and Innovation, and they are specifically what we call our AIMS department, our Automated Information Mapping. They do our GIS work, And they are the ones that actually built this system from the ground up. They're the ones that maintain it. They do all the enhancements and technical development. And it's huge to have that as an asset. So you don't have to go buy something off the shelf. You don't have to go out and work with a vendor. And then the other big thing is, you know, we reached out and we have really great community partners that have worked with us. The resource data that's in our application comes from the Greater Kansas City United Way. The 211, they did an MOU with us where they give us all their resource data. We're working with a lot of our local governing community, like I said, Kansas City, Kansas, and other nonprofits, hospitals that are also working with us to help make this as robust as possible. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rog McDougall from Mental Health, and he's going to kind of talk to you a little bit about their data application and how it feeds into our system. Rob?
I'm going to talk to you about two different systems that feed into my resource connection. The first is called My Avatar, and this is the electronic medical record that we use as a mental health center to document on upwards of 10,000 clients a year that we work with. This is where we document all of our demographic information, billing information, and then most importantly, treatment and interventions that we conduct with clients. We also document any interventions or contacts with non-clients within the My Avatar system. My Avatar is relatively new to us, and we're still kind of learning the potential of the software. It has a lot of flexibility in creating customizable forms, but also has a lot of potential in looking at data in many different ways and generating a wide variety of reports. We just recently rolled out the client portal portion, which we're pretty excited about, and this is where open clients can actually sign in through a web-based application and view when they have upcoming appointments, and right now a pretty limited part of their own personal medical record too. And they'll be able to send messages to their treatment providers within the mental health center. So My Avatar shares information with MyRC. It only shares open adult and juvenile client mental health records. It does not share records of anybody with a substance use disorder diagnosis. The information is visible within county government, only the covered entities within county government. And this is really a relatively small group of people, approximately 390. I think we're about between 3,000 and 4,000 total employees. All of these specific employees that have access to the more the covered entity sort of information or the more health-related information, all have gone through our HIPAA training, and then they go through another 3.5-hour MyRC-related training. And then lastly, too, clients can sign a release in which opens up their information to even entities outside of the covered entities too. The next system I'll talk briefly about is called JIMS. This is our Justice Information Management System. That's what JIMS stands for. And this is a shared criminal justice database by a variety of county agencies, to include the Sheriff's Department, Clerk's Office, the DA, judges, court services, and community corrections. There are also certain points that other county departments can access or even use JIMS for, to include the mental health center, the court trustees, attorneys, title companies, CASA, and some other law enforcement agencies. The beauty of JIMS is that while many of these sections, almost all of them are partitioned, so not everybody can look at everything, the system is fully integrated. So this allows for us as a county to cross-reference and pull data from a much more global picture on, you know, if we have a particular client that's had contact with our mental health co-responder and we want to look to see what how they penetrated into the criminal justice system and other areas, we can figure that out. If we want to cross-reference certain populations from, let's say, juvenile offenders, how many juvenile offenders have had been involved with a child in need of care case, we can collect that sort of data and information. and do it relatively quickly without having to go through paper charts. I know one thing that the GIMS folks will talk about is they have gone nearly paperless within our criminal justice record keeping, and I believe that's saved several $100,000 a year just in terms of managing in paper, managing the information and the actual paper itself. And then lastly, we have been fortunate to be a JCMHC grantee on two different occasions for our mental health co-responder programs, and we had a section in GIMS that we used for all of our data collection, and we could pull the reports from to be utilized for our reporting obligations. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Chris, who will talk further about MyRC.
Thanks, Rob. And that's kind of a good segue because the one thing I also want to make everybody aware of is that our DTI AIMS department with GIMS and with MyAvatar and with all the other databases that feed us data, we are kind of a central repository. And what they did when they built MyRC is they went out and found where is all this data, because you know the county owns our own GIMS data, the court records. We don't own the mental health data. We don't own the developmental supports data. So what we did is worked with the vendor, and they actually went out and built what we kind of, the easiest way for somebody who's not tech savvy like myself to explain it is they built a doorway into that software that every night or once a week or however frequently it is set up, that door opens and whatever specified data and whatever specific data sets were agreed upon, we go in, grab those, and pull them out and put them into MyRC. And then what happens is that information matches up behind the scenes in the application. So for that to effectively happen, we had to go out and sign business associate agreements because our AIMS department is not a covered entity in the eyes of the federal government. So because they're going to be getting all these protected health records and all this data, they agreed to pretty much act as a covered entity and ensure that they would protect and have all the technical safeguards in place and would house this data, support it, store it, and maintain it. And that's part of how you go about addressing that issue of data sharing. You'll also hear this referred to as a data sharing agreement in some cases. You have to have those things put in place. And then as Rob already mentioned, every staff member who accesses this application, whether it's a probation officer, a mental health clinician, whether it's a developmental supports case manager, everybody has to go through HIPAA training and then also has to go through a 3.5-hour training on how to utilize the application, and that talks about appropriate use of that application. And there was actually a confidentiality information exchange agreement that our legal department and our HIPAA consultants actually designed to identify and have staff sign so if there ever is a potential for misuse, we would fall back and say, hey, this individual knew not to, they were trained not to use the application in that way. So these are part of the things you can do that help safeguard you when it comes to sharing that kind of information. So what we're getting ready to go into here is this is what our application looks like. These are screenshots that have been de-identified and had information kind of restricted. But this shows you how if you went in and looked at a probation officer's caseload, the information's coming out of our GIMS system, and this identifies all 39 of her offenders that she's currently supervising. Out to the left-hand side of the name, you'll see a client ID, and it has a little red flag by it, and that red flag tells her, hey, you share this individual with another agency that we're pulling data from. So if she were to click on that, and let's say specifically in this case, if you hover over it, this is going to show that this is somebody that's on adult probation, Johnson County house arrest, has been involved with our health and environment department, and is also a client or consumer of mental health. When you click on that individual, you're going to be able to go in here and see the municipal house arrest that's at the top is kind of faded out, and that's because that's a closed case. This individual is still identified as having been involved with our house arrest department. They're no longer working with them. They're closed. But they are still active with mental health, health and environment, and our adult probation. So if we dig a little bit deeper, the information that we pull identifies address that they're living at, and if you look off to the right beside the address, you're going to see 3 other clients at this address. We have the ability to link together, is there other members of this family or other people that are receiving services that we pull data from using that same address? And if so, let's identify who those people are as well. So you're going to be able to tell who the case manager is, or in this case, the service coordinator, what their phone number is. There's also a hyperlinked email so that you can make direct contact with them, and that contact occurs within the application so that we can maintain its security. And that allows for just information to immediately go across to that new case manager. But I want to stop there and say, that does not mean that when that mental health service coordinator gets that email, that they're just going to open the doors and say, oh, what do you need to know? I'll share anything with you. What that tells that service coordinator is, hey, apparently another user of MyRC who is a staff member of Johnson County has this level of access. I probably need to go talk to my consumer and see about getting a release signed so that I can share more information than what is in MyRC right now. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rob. He's going to kind of take you the rest of the way through here and talk about HIPAA and how mental health communicates with law enforcement.
Hello again. I want to talk briefly about HIPAA and law enforcement. Within Johnson County, we have, I believe it's 17, maybe 18 different law enforcement agencies. And so while that's a lot of different agencies and cultures and such, we have really worked hard over the last 10 or 15 years to collaborate and develop as positive and collaborative relationships as possible. And our crisis intervention team training, or CIT training in particular, has been probably the catalyst for helping to have or develop those relationships. As many of you are probably very well aware, as a mental health provider and a health agency, HIPAA becomes very apparent and important, and oftentimes can be seen as impeding contact or care coordination, not just with law enforcement, but we've even had issues sometimes with other hospitals or medical providers. And I won't go into great detail about HIPAA, except just to talk about sort of our interactions in particular with law enforcement. And probably on the emergent side, the most relevant exception is we have an ability to share information with a law enforcement. Again, I'll read from the HIPAA resource itself. To a law enforcement official reasonably able to prevent or lessen a serious and imminent threat, to the health or safety of an individual or the public. We've got 2 co-responders. These are mental health professionals that are embedded with our 2 largest departments, and this is a program that's also expanding into, actually, hopefully within the next year, most all of our other police departments within Johnson County. And so with our co-responders in particular, are responding, anytime they respond, they are responding with law enforcement. And so when they're on scene, right there by default, the law enforcement officers are helping secure the scene and make sure the scene remains safe, and they're going to be part of that care coordination of what do we do next, and working with the mental health professional. Our goal oftentimes is to either engage the person into services with the mental health center, or assess if they need a higher level of care or hospitalization or whatnot. And an underlying goal, if we can reasonably avoid the person being arrested and get them into treatment instead, that's in most cases a win-win for everybody. We also have a mobile crisis response team that works during business hours, during the daytime, that does a lot of outreaching with law enforcement also, who we'll have either from law enforcement, they'll have contacted us because they have concerns about somebody and their behavior and possibly suffering from mental illness, or we'll get calls from family, apartment complexes and such with concerns, and there may be safety factors or safety issues that we feel like we need to go out and outreach with law enforcement. We are very open with sharing any sort of safety-related information with law enforcement. So this would include if we know that there's weapons in the house, or we know that the person's made some pretty specific threats or has a history of aggression, we will share that for everybody's safety's sake, going into a situation. And this is very much reciprocated by law enforcement also. If we're going out and they've got some information that they think would be relevant to our own safety well-being, they're pretty good about letting us know. We spend a lot of time or make great effort in emphasizing the value of non-emergent information from law enforcement. So them just calling us, because they can pretty liberally share information with us, just calling us and saying, hey, we had contact with this person, we think they're a client of yours, and pretty confident they're not taking their meds, or we've had contact with them 3 times. If you guys could follow up, that would be great, or something along those lines. And that information is super valuable because we may not necessarily be aware that there's been some problem, and that gives us the opportunity to go out and further intervene. And then finally, we've had some clients and some families that have a lot of law enforcement contact, and we certainly, in those cases where it appears that there's going to be ongoing coordination, make every effort to coordinate a release being signed for whichever agency is going to be involved. Lastly, going back to my resource center, and collaboration with probation and corrections in particular, Chris had talked a bit about the flags. When we have an open client at the mental health center, and let's say they all of a sudden they've had a criminal case and they're now going on to probation, there is what's called a mutual client alert that will automatically pop up for the case manager or therapist or whoever's working with them at the community mental health center to let us know that, hey, this person it now has a probation officer, and right there gives us an opportunity to talk to the clients and hopefully get a release and then work on coordinating efforts. Also, our MedAct or our EMS paramedics, anytime they run somebody or are called out to somebody's house, we also receive an alert, an auto-generated email indicating that they had contact. And again, that provides us an idea if somebody's having frequent contact or is a frequent user, or maybe they're having health issues that we're not aware of, and again, gives us the opportunity to try to work in coordinating and helping our folks be as healthy and do as well as they can. In other situations, if someone is on probation, we've had times before where clients forget who the probation officer is or doesn't have contact information. We can go right into MyRC and pull that up pretty quick like. There are other times where we've gone out and we're actively outreaching somebody, and what we've noticed is the contact information, address and phone number information within MyRC if somebody's on probation can, especially for somebody that's either homeless or precariously housed, is oftentimes more accurate than what we have within our system. So there's been times before where the information relative to somebody who's on probation in MyRC has allowed us to find the person, make contact, and engage with them into services. And then lastly, we use a combination of MyRC and GYMS. We're looking at those sites on a regular basis where there's a list of you can do both an inmate search and also a booking report, and we're frequently getting information from there about clients that have been arrested and ended up in jail, and again gives us the opportunity to reach out to our jail partners and outreach the person in jail if possible and help coordinate efforts from there. So that is all I think we have right now from Johnson County. I'm going to go ahead and, I believe, pass the baton on to Imran Chaudhry.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to try my best to complement whatever's been shared already, either by Risa, Will, Rob, or Chris. Areas where our experience mirrors theirs, I'll try to call those out. But I think just in terms of an overall perspective, I'd like to start off by sharing just briefly who we are and what we do. We're the District of Columbia Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. The way that we came about was that in 2001, the General Accounting Office, the federal GAO, performed a study And the outcome of that, essentially, and it was with regards to the District of Columbia criminal justice system, and the title of the study was Better Coordination Needed Among Participating Agencies. And you can all pretty much, I'm going to guarantee, you can predict what the ultimate conclusion of this report was. So, in a nutshell, we're 60 square miles. We've got over 20 agencies which have arresting authority. Just from arrest to first appearance in court, it takes coordination amongst 7 or 8 agencies. What's interesting about these 7 or 8 is that some are from the federal government, some are district government, some within district government fall under the mayor's authority, others are independent, and then you have the third sort of standalone, which is the judiciary. Now, all of these 3 or 4 jurisdictions have to somehow come together in order for the criminal justice system as a whole to function efficiently. And that's ultimately what the GAO report examined and came to the ultimate recommendation that such a body should be created. Hence, we got our reason for being. In terms of how we're set up, and again, I'm going to try to follow Rob and Chris's lead on this, and hopefully share with you some examples, some thoughts on issues and challenges that we've had along the way, and give you sort of ideas that you can consider as each of you grapples with your own information sharing challenges. We have a board of directors, and it's composed of the 10 or 11 agencies which share information through our system, which is known as Justice, J-U-S-T-I-S. The chair of the council or the board of directors is the mayor. The co-chair is elected from amongst the federal partners, and the intent there was to maintain a balance between district government participants and also federal government participants. So having a governance framework would probably be our first tidbit of information that we'd share with our participants on the call today. Understand that you're not going to be able to meet the needs of everyone simultaneously, but at least have a mechanism by which you move the process forward. And that's where the entire governance framework comes into play. There is no one-size-fits-all information sharing solution, so understand that while you may be able to come up with an initial vision based upon a business need, understand that you're going to need a mechanism by which you can identify issues and then come together to come up with possible solutions and then hopefully be able to move towards implementing those solutions. So again, that's where the governance comes in. The second sort of nugget from based upon our experience, is be able to articulate in very simple terms what the challenge is which you're trying to address. Keep in mind that your audience is not necessarily going to be technical. It's not always going to be business. So you have to be able to break down in very simple terms what is the community need, public safety need, criminal justice need, mental health need, which you're ultimately trying to address. What we've also found, and this echoes what Chris had mentioned in terms of getting buy-in from department directors, absolutely, that's been our experience as well. The only thing we would piggyback on top of that is that we also realized that having an overall champion for promoting any given information sharing initiative can go a long way, particularly when it comes to alleviating any concerns that the department directors may have. In our case, it was the former chief judge of the D.C. Superior Court. He was the cheerleader-in-chief for the CJCC, and it was amazing how when a judge called a meeting, so many people showed up. Also, he was able to get the participants to come together and also facilitate at that director level a conversation whereby they could ultimately come to an agreement on some overall principle. And then the number twos, as we refer to them here, the deputy directors would then be able to step in and follow up in terms of how that vision can be turned into a substantive policy, and how that policy can then be transformed into an information sharing program, along with all of the projects that would fall under that overall umbrella. So having an executive champion would be another suggestion that we would submit to you for your consideration. Also, what we found is, coming back to the governance structure, realize that there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, and as you start getting into sharing information, what you'll realize is that you will identify additional information gaps along the way. You can't necessarily go back to the directors every single week or month, but you need to have some kind of a framework which allows you to work out the issues which arise and a means for addressing them. Sharing with you our governance. We have an overall, first of all, we have our board of directors. Then when it comes to information sharing, we have a top-level policy body, which is chaired by Judge Robert Morin, again from D.C. Superior Court. And here we meet once a month. We discuss policy-level issues. This is where it's sort of the ideas incubator almost, but it also is the venue where we are able to get official sanction for initiatives that we're trying to conduct. And typically what we'll do is every year we get together for a strategic planning session. So we're planning initiatives for the next year and the one after that. So this is not something which you can just come at once, but it's a certain mindset. It's a certain information sharing environment which you have to create, and it's constantly ongoing. So that top-level information sharing body in our case is known as the ITAC, or Information Technology Advisory Committee, and then we have subcommittees. Or work groups, as we refer to them here. One deals with legal issues as they come up. One deals with data quality issues. The third one deals with security-related issues. And the fourth one is the vehicle by which we actually go about designing projects, implementing them, and reporting issues which need to be addressed either on a day-to-day basis or as we're going through testing before we go live with any of our initiatives. So again, these four work groups work for us. They may not work for you. But what we have found is that whenever there is an issue, it'll make its way up from the work group up to the ITAC. We'll get sanctions or approvals from the ITAC, and then ultimately we'll make sure that we engage the principals to get their sign-off as well. In terms of I'm just going through my notes very quickly. One of the ways that we've addressed the whole issue of handling the the overriding concern that many agencies have when they're first approached to start making their information available is something that I've heard referred to as hug my box, which is the box being a PC, and just sort of a natural reflex to protect one's own information. So in that regard, what we will strive to reinforce is, number one, again, what's the issue, what's the need, what information is needed, why is it needed, who is requesting access to it, and how will it be used. But the key in all of this is we are extremely persistent, aggressive, and very clear in any of these kind of conversations to explain that it is the agency which owns the information which lays out terms and conditions of usage. They are the ones who make any and all access-related decisions. And it's interesting when you start with that perspective, how you're able to move from the why to the how. So that would be a bit of advice that we would share with you. Another area is you'll be surprised that the more information you start sharing, again, as I mentioned before, you'll find additional areas which need to be addressed in terms of addressing a business need. In other words, you're sharing certain kinds of information. Business folks realize that there's a gap. And that means, okay, well, we have to contact another agency because their information is sort of the missing link. And it's a never-ending process in that regard. What we've also experienced is that as you make more information available, it's interesting how you never, ever get everything that you ask for on the first try. So our experience has been to always develop information sharing programs, hope for the best, but then prepare for not necessarily achieving the best. And an example of that would be if you're looking for, let's say, 50 data fields from a given agency. If you can make it to 25, take it. Use that as your foundation. And then you can build upon that. So I think it's absolutely crucial for any jurisdiction contemplating information sharing as an ongoing practice to realize that you need a starting point. And it is an approach which has served us well. And what ultimately happens is once you have that foundation in place, the example being the 25 data fields that I shared with you, it's much easier to build upon that in the future as opposed to holding out until all 50 have been addressed, which in many cases is not what ultimately the end result is. I'm just taking another quick note. There's a lot, obviously, which can be covered, but I'll leave it with this one final thought. And I think Chris alluded to this. It is absolutely key to have the both business representatives and technical representatives participating in these conversations. Always have the business need drive the technology and not the other way around. And what we've also experienced is it's absolutely key to have the right business managers involved in these initiatives, meaning those individuals who have experience with their agency, who understand what their mission is, what the internal operations of the department or agency are, and who have the authority to speak on behalf of the department. Bring the technology folks along, but as an example, the last thing you would want to try and do is to have your agency or county IT director making a case for why criminal justice sharing information is a worthwhile endeavor. You certainly want individuals such as either the county chair, your police chief, or whoever the other appropriate criminal justice or law enforcement representative would be. That's it for our overview. I will, in the interest of trying to tie this to HIPAA and some of the mental health conversations which have already taken place, say that what we're seeing is more and more agencies on the criminal justice side expressing an interest to start receiving mental health related information and vice versa. This is an area that we are moving slowly towards. We're still in the let's talk this through, let's figure out who needs what the privacy and confidentiality and non-disclosure concerns and restrictions are, but we're seeing more of that nexus here in the nation's capital. Gil, I think this is probably a good time for me to stop. I think I've covered most of the items that I had on my cheat sheet here, so I'll hand it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And wow, what a ton of information, Imran, and from Chris and Rob as well. Just a plethora of details there, and really great to be walked through from start to finish how both your jurisdictions were able to develop these really comprehensive and quite different information sharing collaborations and processes. So just generally, I do hope that folks on the webinar were able to take away a lot of different items and examples that you can bring back home and think about how to apply them to your own specific needs and challenges facing your particular jurisdiction, being both of these were counties or districts, so maybe a little different of an experience for state-level stakeholders on the line. But we have about 20-25 minutes for questions, and a couple questions have come in. So I think if it's all right with you all, just pose some of these questions to our speakers and ask folks to respond. So the first one, the first question was actually answered partially by Chris in our chat bar below, but I wanted to open up to the group, was around, for Johnson County, the My Resource Connection. The question was, did you have an internal IT department design, build this, or an outside vendor? I'd love to hear that answer, and then there was a follow-up question that did come in that's connected to this that I posed to both of Johnson County and Washington, D.C. For implementing your information sharing processes, what did you need to buy in terms of on the technology side, and how did you pay for it, or did you create it yourself? So I'll start with the specific My Resource Connection piece, and then a more general, what did you need to purchase to implement the overall process?
Okay, I'll go ahead and start off there, and I tried to answer, but I wasn't having the greatest luck with our keyboard here. The question related to My Resource Connection, we developed that and built that in-house with our own Department of Technology and Innovation, specifically our AIMS department, which is Automated Information Mapping, our GIS department. They built the application, and when it comes to what else did we have to buy, we have not had to buy anything. In fact, our county manager, whenever I present with him, he loves to stand up and say, we built this for free, which is a little misleading because there is the time and the resources and the manpower that went into developing it, but what he really means is that we did not buy from a vendor. We did not purchase a product off the shelf. We did not use any of our, we did not add a mill levy increase. We didn't raise property taxes. We didn't apply for a grant. We just built this in-house, and the group that works on our application, they do that on top of their other job responsibilities. So, I mean, it is a very in-house, you know, organic type process that went into developing it.
On the DC side, Gil, we, like Chris's team, we developed justice in-house, and it was paid for through a grant in terms of the initial implementation cost. But going to the, that question leads into another overarching area that jurisdictions have to take into account, is to understand the total cost of ownership associated with building these systems and then ultimately maintaining them. We on the district, on the justice side, we're designated as the District of Columbia's IJIS system, Integrated Justice Information System. So most of the 50 states have a designated IJIS system, and we interact with a few of our Northeast regional neighbors, Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. I can tell you from experience that those three jurisdictions, those states, have also developed their respective IJIS systems in-house. When presenting estimates for implementation of a technology system, what participants would want to keep in mind is also lay out what it's going to cost to maintain that system going forward. Every 5 or 6 years, we're doing a hardware and software refresh, just as an example. Those kind of expectations need to be laid out and constantly reinforced, because the last thing you want to do is to have these decision makers think, oh, we paid for it once, we're good to go, and we don't have to worry about it. Unfortunately, we all realize that with the changing face of technology, you have to be constantly going back to the well to maintain your technology posture.
Great, thanks so much. And we have several questions coming in, but I just want to encourage everyone that's listening in on the webinar to send us your questions, and I will facilitate asking them to our speakers, or if you had questions to the Justice Center as well, we could answer those as well. So the next question is a general one, but I think a good one, and was touched on in several ways by both of you, but the question is just around what you all would say is the greatest barrier that was facing your project, or is still possibly facing your project, but either at the beginning to overcome that barrier or throughout. And then on the flip side, what would you say was the key to your success of your project and getting to the point where you are now? So I know you all touched on that a little bit. Imran, you touched a little bit about the importance of a champion in particular. It sounded like that might have been a key, but just wanted to pose that question back to the group as well.
Well, you know, on the DC side, let me twist that question around. What's our biggest challenge now is whenever we're designing an information sharing initiative, coordinating the availability of resources so that the project as a whole can move forward. I'll give you an example. We have 3 initiatives underway right now. One involves us and the other 3 states. One involves us and 6 agencies, and one involves us and 3 agencies. In every instance, the challenge is to make sure that every agency has its in-house technical resources available based upon an agreed-upon timeline. So that would be our current biggest challenge. A key to our success, frankly, it's been delivering what we promised, and that's where you get into the expectations game. We started out as an information portal where we pulled information from 10 agencies, displayed it in a single interface. We've got currently 36 agencies that access this information. And then ultimately what we heard back from our partners was, well, you know, we'd love to be able to receive this information and incorporate it into our own in-house systems. This came based upon, again, our track record of having a robust system, it not going down, it providing the information that users were seeking, us responding to any glitches that came up. And so once our partners became confident in our ability to deliver, they started asking for more. And that more ultimately resulted in us starting to actually start functioning as a hub for the exchange of near real-time data feeds. So to give you an example, every single adult criminal arrest, which occurs within the District of Columbia, with 20-plus arresting agencies, flows through our system. And recipient agencies receive that information, and they incorporate it into their in-house case management systems. So.
And I think for Johnson County, our biggest obstacle, believe it or not, was not the HIPAA and the legal. It was actually a cultural, breaking down silos within departments of, getting people to see, to look beyond what they see as the scope of their job. We had a lot of people that when we first started developing this and started the data sharing, you had the people that looked at it and said, you know what, that's not my job. I'm hired to be a probation officer, or I'm hired to be a mental health case manager, or whatever. That's what their focus was. And then you had the people that no matter how much information legal that you provided them, no matter how much reassurance you gave them, you had some people that just looked at it and said, I don't think we should be sharing data. And it was trying to break down those kind of barriers. I think now, I would also agree with Emron that you're going to have the ongoing costs. And for us, now we've built a system that we built on a shoestring budget, and now we're to a point that to continue to maintain that, they're going to have to put some, the county as a whole or whoever is going to have to put some resources behind it, because we've grown so big that that's probably one of our biggest obstacles now.
Great. Thanks so much. So we have another question that came in for both Johnson County and Washington, D.C. Around what sort of training was needed for the different stakeholders in your jurisdictions to use your respective information sharing processes, and is that training ongoing, or how did you map out that process?
Well, for Johnson County, as I mentioned in our presentation, I mean, anyone that's just been been identified by their department as needing access, they have to go through a 3.5-hour training, and part of that training is actually how to navigate the system, what is appropriate use, what information is available. They go through the confidentiality and information exchange agreement, which we spend a significant amount of time on. Because you're talking about sharing information across boundaries, sometimes those boundaries are across, from somebody that's considered a covered entity that's used to dealing with protected health information to a business associate who maybe is not familiar with that, and that's where that HIPAA training comes in. And then there is, under HIPAA, I'm actually the HIPAA privacy officer for Johnson County government, and under the statute, it does not say that you have to do refresher training a specific amount of time, but we do it on an annual basis. So every year, staff are getting refresher training where we touch on that, and then we also do refresher trainings on the My Resource Connection database, because as we make changes, enhancements, upgrades, we want people to be aware of those as well.
On the CJCC side, we started out providing justice training to our partner agencies ourselves. We quickly got to the point where we just didn't have the resources to be able to provide that kind of specialized training. So what we've done is implemented a train the trainer program. Each one of our agencies with access to the system designates, depending on the size of their agency or department, certain individuals as justice trainers. We call them in on a regular basis whenever, either annually or when we have a new functionality that we're rolling out, whichever comes first. We train them, and we cover not just the functionality of the system, but also the do's and don'ts. So what are the acceptable terms and conditions of usage, rules of behavior, what are prohibited uses, and one quick final thought, the training sessions are actually where we get most of our best ideas, because when we engage with the trainers, we ask for their feedback as well. And if there's a little functionality within the system that doesn't rub them the right way, chances are other users have experienced that as well. And so it becomes a wonderful opportunity for us to enhance the system in terms of its functionality going forward.
Great. Thanks so much. And we have another question here that I think is a good one because we've been talking a lot about the overall system, and this one really focuses in on actually collecting some of the information and that these are individuals that we're dealing with. So it's just a question around what sort of permissions are needed from individuals who are actually the ones who are either clients in your system or offenders in the system, what sort of individual permissions are necessary to allow for information sharing across agencies.
Well, on the district side, it's pretty straightforward on our end, in that the agency which contributes the data or owns it, they're the ones that make those decisions. The way that we're currently set up, it is an all or none proposition. So if an agency would like to grant another agency access to its information, the receiving agency, the viewing agency, would receive access to the entire data set. We've heard from folks over time that they'd like us to be able to provide some degree of field level access whereby certain agencies don't get to see the entire data set, but because of because of resource challenges, we haven't quite gotten off in that direction just yet.
And from Johnson County's side, our GIM system, which is the court information, probation records, things like that, that is public record. So it's actually up to the GIM's governing board if they wanted to grant us access. And then for us to make that information available to the other users, it's because of its public record, that information can readily be made available. In our application, I may have mentioned this during the presentation, in My Resource Connection, there is a partition. And the partition is split between those covered entities under county government that are involved in the care and treatment that under HIPAA, they are allowed to share data amongst each other. And then on the other side of that partition is the business associates, which would be our courts, probation departments, our housing departments, so on and so forth. So for a record on the secured side to be visible to somebody on the business associate side, the only two departments that require releases of information are mental health and the housing authority because of HUD regulations. The other departments, it is available through a notice of information practice. When you go through our health department, they provide you a notice of information practices saying if you're going to receive services from us, here's how your information may be used. And in that NOIP, it actually identifies that this is one of the ways that information may be used. So that's more of a passive consent. But the only time we really need a release of information is for a mental health consumer's records to be visible to probation officers, housing authority, child care licensing, or any of those other departments that are not a covered entity in the eyes of the federal government.
Thanks so much. And this is actually our last question from the group, and this may have been touched on a little bit as well, but I think it's another good question. Just asking for folks to expand a little bit on how they incorporated the guidance of their legal department or outside lawyers if necessary, and that maybe in particular on the HIPAA side is where that question is coming from. But if you could all just expand a little bit on some of the the legal concerns and how you incorporated input from either local or outside lawyers.
Well, on the DC side, we typically, when it comes to usage and access, we lay all of that at the feet of the agency which is contributing the information. And we ask them to identify any prohibited uses, any permissible uses, etc. We really follow their lead on that. We make sure that we've got the appropriate disclosures when users access the system, in all of our training manuals and in all of our documentation. On the legal side, it's typically we've utilized resources when we're coming up with memorandums of understanding at the agency to agency level without specific mention, if you will, of the specific data fields that are being shared. So give you an example. When an agency requests access to our system, we as the system owner must determine that it's a criminal justice agency, public safety, law enforcement, etc. If they fall within that category, we will then enter into an MOU with them. We have used external resources to help us develop that MOU template, and then we send that off to the agencies. Once we've signed the MOU with the requesting agency, then the second part of the process kicks in, whereby we send the request over to each of the agencies whose information the requesting agency wishes to see within our system. And if there's any concerns from a legal perspective, ultimately the contributing agency just gives us an up or down vote. We really don't get into, from that perspective, too much on the legal front when it comes to dealing with discussions related to specific data fields. We keep that in the contributing agency's side of the court.
That's
and
really interesting.
Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, no, that was Will. I was just going to add a comment, and then please, Johnson County, go ahead. But I was just going to say that really speaks to, for the DC side, the importance of agency buy-in and willingness to make sure that all of their legal concerns are addressed on their side, and then willingness to coordinate with you all. So seems like a lot of work would go in on the back end to alleviate some of those legal concerns on the front end. So that's all I was going to say. Go ahead.
Well, from the Johnson County end, we have our in-house legal counsel that has been at the table since day one. And then, as I mentioned before, we do have an external HIPAA consulting firm. The law firm of Spencer Fain is who we currently are contracted with, and they have expertise in HIPAA and healthcare law. So they're also at the table. And anytime we have drafted a release of information, or we've looked at what information can legally be shared, either with or without a release, if it's a passive consent, all of that gets vetted out through them. And each department who has a vested interest to make sure that they're not inappropriately sharing information has, in some cases, checked with either their professional, in some cases they have a professional organization associated with them, and they make sure that they maybe vet that out with them to make sure that what we're doing is legal and that we can appropriately share the information. And then from that point, each department decides who should and should not have access and what level of access they should have within our application. And then they notify me as the county's privacy officer, and then we go through getting them scheduled for the training, going through the HIPAA training, so on and so forth, maintaining those records so that way we have them. And then the one thing I didn't mention is our application is the most audited application in Johnson County government. It is audited every month. There is a random computer sampling that is done that goes in and picks individuals to be audited. Those audit reports are shared with departments to make sure if somebody does look at something they're not supposed to, it's going to send off a notification to us and let us know. that we need to go in and look at that. And staff are very aware that because of the sensitive nature of the information shared in that application, if you misuse it, you're opening yourself up to disciplinary action up and to possible termination of employment. So that's, that's a big factor when it, with how we've chosen to deal with the security and the sensitive nature of the application.
Thank you so much. Yeah, some really useful information there, and a lot of great questions from our participants. We are just about at the time for our webinar here, so I want to thank everyone for participating. Chris, Rob, Imran, and Risa, thank you so much for speaking on this session. Thank you again to the participants for all your wonderful questions. As mentioned earlier, we will be providing a version of this webinar online, which we'll be sending you a link to shortly, but will probably be up on our website in about a week or so. And then we can provide a PDF of the PowerPoint slides as well to the participants in the webinar. So thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate it. Hope you all found the information useful. Have a great day.